would it have been better if Rachel Reeves had come out, say, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and said, "Look, we've discovered this black hole. We've spoken about it, and we're going to raise that." And should she not have just raised income tax and taking the hit square on the chin rather than do it in the sort of roundabout way and by freezing thresholds and putting tax on electric cars? Would you not have been better to be, I suppose, a bit more honest in a way?
Well, I mean, don't forget that the thresholds had already been frozen till 2029 anyway.
But she's
This is
extended
future
that.
thresholds, and I think the press have been very unkind at not explaining that properly to the public on the basis that a lot of the newspapers are going, income tax, people are going to be hit with higher income tax, but that's not the case until 28, 29, and things might have changed by then. But Rachel did say that. She did that speech, what, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that said that she might have to look at putting up income tax because what subsequently happened, and this is something again that's quite complicated, but for the person in the street to see. But the OBR, which is the independent body that sets all of the growth targets, all of the impacts of government policy, decided to change the methodology they were using on the UK's productivity post COVID. So what this was is they were redrawing productivity for the previous government. The result of all of that was that productivity went down by more than they had already anticipated, which essentially wiped out the Chancellor's headroom, which is the amount of money she has on top of the budget for unforeseen circumstances. It's your rainy day fund, if you like. And the OBR, because of the change of that productivity on the previous government, wiped that headroom out, which meant the markets got jittery, which meant the Chancellor had to come out and say, I have to either cut spending or raise more taxes. Subsequently, what happened is the OBR figures weren't as bad as the Chancellor thought they were going to be. These are independent figures, but the stuff that we said we would abide by, because Liz Truss didn't abide by those figures, and look what happened to the economy, which we're all still paying for. So those weren't as bad as they were projected to be, and therefore she didn't have to increase income tax in that way. So there's no conspiracy theory here, or there's no lies, or there's no trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. What happened was the OBR decided that they were going to redraw the framework, which made the position worse. And she said, we're going to have to try and deal with that. But ultimately, the figures, when they were finalised, weren't as bad as she thought they were going to be.
But I lose to the electorate, who I say probably don't understand. It probably lose very bad to the electorate because it does look like a series of broken manifesto pledges and a series of broken promises, and it can't be good for the government or for a Keir Starmer. And people are asking whether or not he's done things like the removing the teacher cap, which is a good thing for a lot of people. But again, a lot of people say, well, he said that he absolutely wouldn't do that. So has Rachel Reeves done that to appease backbenchers, or has she done that because that's what her and Keir really want to do?
Well,
What do you think?
Yeah, there's a number of aspects to that question, but let me answer them in the way in which the Prime Minister has made clear. Now, this big debate happened at the general election, and it happened when Labour were finalising the manifesto because the two-child cap removal was not in the manifesto. We had all said it was an abhorrent policy. We had all said that the rape clause was one of the most pernicious policies that any government had ever put in place. And we wanted to get rid of it. But the reason it wasn't in the manifesto was because we couldn't afford it. We wanted to be honest with the public that we could only make these kinds of promises if we could show where the money was coming from, and we couldn't show where the money was coming from, and then it wasn't in the manifesto. Keir and Rachel have always been clear, including myself and everyone else, that we wanted to get rid of this policy, but we had to be able to pay for it. What was subsequently done is there was an amendment to the King's speech at the start of the Labour government, if you remember, that we voted against in terms of removing the two-child cap because we couldn't pay for it. There was no money to pay for it. Now that there is a bit more money in there, and now the decisions that have been made last October and in this budget, we're now able to be in a position to remove that. Now, that's the technical side of it. But the purpose of this is also that Labour governments are the only governments that lower child poverty. Child poverty went up by nearly 1 million under the Tories.
Yeah.
This brings child poverty down by 450,000. It's the largest fall in child poverty of any government since records began. And therefore, that's why you do this kind of stuff, because this is what Labour governments do. So there's no breaking of manifesto pledges here. There's no, well, you said this, but you did that, because we always said if we could afford it and show where the money was coming from, we would then remove it. And we've shown where the money is coming from. The gambling levy has been increased in order for us to raise over £1 billion. There's money in the budget coming through the freezing of the income tax thresholds. There's a bit more headroom in there. And we said in our manifesto we'd cut waiting lists, which has been diverted to the NHS. We said we would cut the cost of living, which is what the budget was about. And we said if we could afford it, we'd move the two-child cap. So now we can afford it, we're removing it. So there's really no conspiracy theory here. And our opponents on this kind of stuff, like the SNP, for example, they had the powers and had 8 years to remove
Yeah.
that,
There's
decided
nothing.
not to. And if you remember, Nicola Sturgeon decided not to in Parliament publicly, and she was asked why, and she said, because we can't afford it. So this is exactly what's happened. And if you've seen Keir's news pieces yesterday, when he was asked about this, he was passionate about this. Labour government's lower child poverty. That's what we're here to do. It's about aspiration and opportunity, and that's why we made the decision. But it wasn't in our manifesto, and we voted against it in the King's speech because we couldn't afford it. We didn't know where the money could come from.
I'm read said that the SNP had £155 million set aside to lift the cap in Scotland, but they didn't do it. And so now that the cap's been lifted across the UK, and technically they should have that money somewhere.
Well, and David, let me be very clear about this to your listeners. That £155 million could have been spent to lift the cap much earlier. But let's not forget that £150 million extra that they've got is because of the Labour government coming in last year. Since July 2024, the Scottish Government has £10 billion extra to spend because of decisions of the Labour Government to end austerity and to fund our public services properly. The big question for your listeners is going to be, where has all that money gone? And that's a big question they should be asking the SNP election.
Yeah.
So, all of this stuff that they say about we can't do this, we can't do that, we want to do this, we want to do that, they are much better off with a Labour government. And the social experiments that the Tories put in place in terms of the two-child cap were social experiments that had nothing to do with the welfare bill. And of course, the social experiment the SNP have done, the political experiment was, it was much more political expedient for them not to remove the two-child cap because it was an attack on Labour than it was for them to remove it. And that says more about them than it says about the Labour Party's position today.